Hello. Um, I've been asked to give an update on semiconductors, and so this is meant to be a high-level view of what's going on, kinds of activities, kind of the big picture items currently in Washington, and where hopefully they might end up going. Um, so again, it's nice to be part of the HPC user forum. This talk is recorded a little bit before the meeting, and so it is possible that some of some of the actions on the Hill might be updated between now and mid-September, but we can probably do that in Q&A sessions. I want to emphasize these are my opinions, my views, and I'm not speaking for anyone other than myself here. Okay, semiconductors are a kind of a broad term. We sometimes use microelectronics. It is fairly comprehensive. It ties to many different things. And we've been looking in government for many years now at some of the impacts of semiconductors on the US economy, on our competitiveness. There are many different aspects of this. I've been involved in a lot of the White House organized policy committees that have, I think started up late in the Obama administration. They were picked up and continued through the Trump administration, and now they are also working through the Biden administration. At least for the last 6 or more years, we have been engaged in trying to understand how to best move the ball forward here. And there are a lot of different challenges that we have to try and understand. Part of this is US-China competitiveness. With all the fabs being built in China, with our reliance on TSMC and Samsung, kind of the overseas fabs, what is the risk we have in terms of the high-end super semiconductors? How do we think about that? What are the supply chain issues? Recently, in the last year or two, during COVID especially, we became far more aware of this with respect to the automotive industry. Uh, it's it's surprising today how much of the cost of a modern vehicle is in the electronics. And today, it's roughly about 40% of the car, and we expect it to be more in the future. And that is changing the landscape in many different ways, from all the different components that are smarter and talking to each other to where they're made and how they're distributed. And so the workforce that has to do that as well is changing. There's so much intellectual property. How do we protect it? How do we cultivate the next generation of people to worry about this? How do we innovate? How do we worry about today's technology needs and what might be coming around the bend tomorrow? And tied to the emerging technologies are kind of the future markets. And within all of these things, there are additionally so many other issues. But broad brush, there are a handful of disparate topics that are tied up in semiconductors, including research and development and creating new fabs and all of this. And so there is an infrastructure part to this as well. And so it's very complicated in that the government doesn't own all this space. And so the role we have and the role we can play is tempered by the things we are actually able to do, given that the market is so big, and we certainly won't be able to control it from Washington. So, thinking about those challenges and how we've tried to tackle them over the years, there have also been, a compendium of reports that have focused on semiconductors and various adjacent issues. And those have helped in terms of getting broader support for some of the challenges we face. On the Hill, consequently, in the last Congress and certainly in this one, there have been actions that are notable in trying to move the ball forward. So I'll touch on a little bit some of the bills enacted into law, and some of the pending bills and kind of the next steps that are needed in order to make an impact here. I'll show you some of the details of the bills just so if you want, you have them in one place. But a lot of these details are not that important for everyone. It's more just for completeness. So some of the slides might be a little bit dense with information, but don't worry about that. The high level message is really the one that's important. There are some initial seed funding efforts going on, including within the Department of Energy, and then I want to add a few more thoughts just to kind of close out and see where we are. So, just to summarize a couple of the reports, again, this is not meant to be comprehensive. I think just a few of the recent things that are perhaps notable and span the space. Again, we've been looking at this problem of semiconductors in all these dimensions for many years. And consequently, we've asked many to help us in trying to understand that. The most recent one that I think, high-powered congressional mandated commission was the NSCAI, the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. While its focus was largely on defense applications for AI, and the national security aspects of AI beyond just DoD. It did, they did take some liberties in speaking broadly about what the needs are of the U.S., how we maintain competitiveness, how we should work with other countries, and because AI is driving a lot of the market today and into the future in terms of novel chips, novel designs, materials, all kinds of things, it is also an important element in how we do this. It was a commission co-chaired by Eric Schmidt and Bob Work, former Deputy Secretary of Defense, and it reported out in March 2021. You can find the report online, but you can find, in there all kinds of recommendations, including draft congressional language on how to implement a national microelectronics strategy. So it was viewed from the outside as something significant for the nation in that. And what's notable there is that was asked for by Congress and it reported back to Congress. From the executive branch at the same time, some of the products of working in the different administrations are executive orders. Two of them I note here, there's certainly others, but one of them more recently from President Biden from February of this year, executive order on America's supply chains, includes the supply chain issues, the materials issues, the research side of semiconductors. It's Executive Order 14017. There was a similar one signed by President Trump early in his administration back in July of 2017, also related to similar topics and the security aspects of the US if we kind of lost the lead in microelectronics or semiconductors. But you can also see these in PCAST reports, the Presidential Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. One of the reports on industries of the future certainly commented on this back in June of 2020, and so on. So in the executive branch, there have been a number of studies as well that have pointed out concerns on why the U.S. Should be thinking seriously about doing something for semiconductors, in that the markets by themselves and the global forces in this may not be entirely favorable if we don't somehow lean into it a little bit. There are federal agency reports too. It's nice to advertise some of the things that have been done within the Department of Energy from the Office of Science. There was a report also on microelectronics that I cite here back from 2018, and you find them also from other entities, from SIA, certainly Hyperion, of course, and others. And so it's not hard to find some of these reports. And then the question is, well, okay, we've identified the problem. We've been looking at it for a number of years. Uh, are there any lever arms here? Is there anything we can do that would make a difference? I think the most notable action uh, is the language that was put into the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. So this is the Defense Authorization Bill. This is the bill that provides the kind of multi-year vision of what the U.S. should be doing on the national security side. It's not just a DoD authorization. It includes all of the national security parts of the U.S. government. And so it can be very sweeping. And the bill in 2021, the bill that gave the authorization for activities for the year 2021, had very good language. Again, it authorizes activities, so it tells federal agencies, we view this to be within your defined scope now. And so it can redefine what agency missions are so that we can do it. The problem is it can tell us how much we're allowed to spend, for example, a cap on spending, but it doesn't actually give any money. It gives policies and authorities so that people can't say it's mission creep, but the funding only comes from appropriations bills. So getting the authorization to do something new is important. It means you're legally allowed to do that. But you still have to find a means to fund it. And so there are two different steps. But this bill, one of the few bills that Congress, both chambers, both parties ensure gets signed every year is defense authorization. This time it had to override a presidential veto, but on January 1st, there was a vote back on the Hill that overrode the veto and it became public law. So this is the one bill that I want to talk a little bit about. And I want to pull out two particular items here for your attention. If you page down out of the 1,480 pages of this bill, down to sections 9,901 to 9,908, there is introduced there the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors for America, or CHIPS for America Act. And this is kind of an important piece of authorization that targets Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of State, Department of Commerce, as well as National Science Foundation, the White House, and others, on how we can stand up to kind of the concerns we have in the semiconductor area. There are also some other parts in there that are worth noting because semiconductors are important to communications and 5G and beyond. For example, there are other relevant sections. On page 1398, there's communications matters, and in sections 9201 to 9204, it's everything from wireless supply chain to Internet of Things, spectrum, and so on. And so I want to talk a little bit about these because this is now law. And so this gives us kind of the structure within government on how we organize ourselves to address semiconductors. Then we have to figure out how to drop money into the bins created here. If you look in a little detail on this CHIPS for America Act, the Section 9900, I pull out, and again, here there are a lot of words, so I apologize for that, but really just looking at the boldface, uh, there are two main sections here, 9902 and 9906, that has four different elements I've pulled out here. 9902 is semiconductor incentives. That's a financial assistance program to help entities that have a demonstrated ability to be in this business to help them along. And it comes potentially with a lot of funding that I'll get to. There's a National Semiconductor Technology Center, again, focused on Department of Commerce, National Advanced Packaging Manufacturer Program, Microelectronics Research, and Manufacturing USA Institute. So there are 5 different things I want to call out, and I'll get back to those in a couple of slides, just to give you a sense of what the opportunities could be. So what needs to happen next? We have the authorization language. So we're told how we should cooperate among agencies, the kinds of things we should do, but we have to find money to do it. Um, the appropriations bills are separate things, and because this is new responsibilities, it's being worked in a new way. And what's important here is that the Senate took the early lead in creating a bill that we abbreviate as USICA, USICA, um, the U.S. Innovation and Competitiveness Act. Um, but it is a funding bill. It originated in the Senate. It did pass through the Senate, and this is perhaps the most important overlay on the public law that came through the Defense Authorization Act. So I want to talk a little bit about this bill. USICA bill, again, U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. Um, it's also a massive bill. It's Senate Bill 1260. If you wanted to look it up online, it's almost 2,400 pages long. In there, you find just a remarkable amount of things. It has a number of main, 7 main divisions. The Division A of this bill is the CHIPS Act, as well as communications such as 5G. And so it covers funding for the CHIPS Act. Division B is the Endless Frontiers Act. That's the restructuring of the National Science Foundation, but includes introducing hubs, regional hubs in the Department of Commerce that could help with semiconductors. And so there are a number of different acts here. And if you look at the end, I mean, the kinds of things you find in there, I copied a few there just because I find them amusing. Section 74733, dog and cat apparel. You have waterproof waist packs. You have children's athletic shoes with glitter uppers, men's cycling shoes valued over $18 per pair, and so on. You have hundreds of these other things that are in there, because in these massive bills you can find almost anything. um, and so you sometimes have to dig around to figure out, well, what is actually in there that can help. But the Division A, and some of Division B, and parts of F are parts of what we should be looking at. Again, this is Senate only. If you look at the CHIPS Act, what the USICA bill does is it proposes funding for what came in the defense authorization bill the previous year. And it's a lot of money. It's more than $50 billion to put into semiconductors. And we haven't had this kind of strong support for R&D in I don't know how long. And so this is significant that there is a bipartisan mood to do something important for the country, that people seem to be getting behind. So what I have in this little table here on the very left side, I have the sections of the Defense Authorization Bill, and in the columns for the fiscal years 2022 to 2026, it's the amount of money being proposed by the USICA bill to drop into there. So in 2022, there's $24 billion, $19 billion going to 9902, which is the financial assistance. So this is helping companies, helping the private sector, companies that have a demonstrated track record to do things to help give them an edge. And that's a lot of money. And that money isn't 1 year money. It can be kept until it's expended. For these research institutes, there's another $5 billion in 2022. um, along, these C, D, and E and F. And so for research, for packaging, for manufacturing, and so on, there is the injection of new money there. And then it goes on. In 2023, there's $7 billion, 5 billion going to financial assistance, and 2 billion to these, regional hubs and packaging and manufacturing and so on. And it continues out for 5 years. It was passed 68 to 32, so very bipartisan. And again, this is one of the parts of the USICA bill that overlays with the public law from the defense authorization. There is a defense fund in there as well. And so there's a national network for microelectronics research and development that is meant to be led by DoD in coordination with others. That's expected to have $400 million a year for the 5 year period 2022 to 2026. So it's another $2 billion coming into microelectronics research targeted to accelerating technologies, exploring architectures, prototyping, fabs, and all kinds of things. And so that's an important source as well. There's also an international piece, the Chips for America International Technology Security and Innovation Fund, which is $100 million a year for those 5 years to be led by the State Department. And so this is part of a broader strategy to engage, foreign countries, to our allies in doing something significant here. If you look at some of these other parts of the Defense Authorization Act, the ones related to communications, for example, 5G, there's also a wireless supply chain innovation fund, $1.5 billion to be spent over roughly a decade. So 5G technologies, 6G and beyond, also an important microelectronics component. There are regional innovation hubs. And so $10 billion over 5 years for Department of Commerce in microelectronics to support these kinds of regional activities that could, give economic growth. And there's semiconductor incentives as well, another $2 billion. And so there's money sprinkled in this 2,400 page bill that is notable. So that's on the Senate side. The challenge is you have to have something passed by the House and the Senate if you want to get the money. The House does not have such a sweeping bill. They have approached it differently. They are looking at it in a bunch of separate bills. There's the NSF of the Future Act, the DOE Science of the Future Act. There are the reauthorization bills for NASA and NIST. There's the Endless Frontiers Act. There's the Regional Innovation Act of 2021. And then there are a couple of partner bills on the Senate side, bioeconomy and development and partnerships for energy security and so on. And so there are a lot of places on the House where parts of the USICA bill are appearing, but there isn't a single House response to it. And so this is what the challenge is going to be. In order to get to a single bill or agreement between the House and Senate, each of the different committees that is putting these different bills together will have to eventually come together and then conference with the Senate to come up with a compromise. And however long that takes is unclear. There were bills in the last Congress before January that were notable, the America Leads Act and so on. But all the bills from last Congress prior to the transition, they time out and they have to be reintroduced. And so, even though there has been good intention, I think a lot of this, we have to look at the new bills now. There's still yet to be any China innovation package, something to counter Chinese actions and how to innovate faster. That has yet to surface on the House side. We're going to need to see this. And then they'll have to get together. So there is still a lot of work to do. But the fact that there is bipartisan support, and a flurry of activity is very promising. There are other places to look, besides USICA. There is a Transportation for America Act, or the Invest Act, as they say, and it did pass the House and Senate just this past week, and so it's going to go off to the president. But related to transportation, again, given that vehicles are 40% microelectronics in terms of cost and going up, given that everything is getting smarter and emerging technologies are part of this, the transportation bill is a place to look for where we can drive semiconductor innovation in modernizing U.S. infrastructure. And so that one is also, there are a lot of these kind of non-standard places that we should be looking, because these are the vehicles that are moving through Congress and have a chance of becoming law and generating resources. And so I think any mechanism that we can find is a useful one. This one would be led by Department of Transportation, including the research programs. I would be remiss to say that there are, seed funding efforts going on. Various agencies are trying to do things, not at the 50 or $100 billion level as is being pushed around on the Hill, but perhaps at 10 million, $50 million kinds of levels, which is good. It keeps people thinking and engaged. It's not enough to do something substantive, but it is important that it shows government interest in doing this. In this past year, certainly I should mention the Office of Science had their Microelectronics Innovation Initiative, which spans most of the Office of Science entities, directorates, in terms of coordinated funding program to broadly look at the science basis for a lot of things related to microelectronics. And it's supported by the Basic Research Needs Report that I quoted back on slide 3, I think. So I think in trying to wrap up, we have been working on the problem of microelectronics for many years now. We've been trying to attack it. There have been a lot of things done in terms of policies, in terms of trying to organize ourselves to think of supply chain issues, in terms of looking at intellectual property and security. I think the thing that has been elusive is the research side and the infrastructure piece and the fabs and how we do some of these harder big ticket issues. And so while we can do policy and change things, to some extent in the executive branch, it really takes partnership with Congress to try something heavier. And I think that's what's at play right now. We have a lot of good signs. I think people understand the importance of semiconductors broadly in our lives today and worry about losing the edge there, and having supply chains choked in ways that could be unfavorable or even corrupted. And so we certainly have to have our act together. We're in a good place with respect to bipartisan support. So this is not viewed as a partisan issue. I think on both sides, people understand this is important. But I think don't just sit there and on the sidelines and assume this will just cruise and we'll be fine. Don't be complacent. Anything can derail any of these actions. We have a huge infrastructure bill going through now, and there is the reconciliation bill that's being tossed around, and how the mood of working together changes, I think is entirely unclear. And so these activities can be fragile. It's a moment in time when there is important support, and we should be leaning into this. And it's really encouraging to see so many agencies, so many parts of the government thinking about this, that this is really on their short list of, we have to do something. And again, it is driven by external advocacy. It's driven by executive branch, by scientists, by academics. And so there isn't a singular place that's driving this. I think people have come together in a way that has been very constructive, and I hope it does lead us somewhere. If I were going to have one caveat, because it's always good to check your work. It is a surprisingly rapidly changing world right now. The kinds of things that we rely on today are things that we really didn't think about 5 years ago, and let alone 10 years ago, not even on our radar. The speed at which the world is changing around us, and technology is evolving in fundamental ways, through artificial intelligence, through quantum, through communications, more use of the spectrum, many different things like that. Um, we have to be careful that we are not anchored to shoring up how we've done things in the past, but we're able to step back and say, as we look at semiconductors and their role, what is the need going to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, beyond that, that is different from the path we're on today, and making that more robust. And it might be that there are other things out there we should be thinking of as well, and we shouldn't overlook that, and thinking that we fixed the problem, this just by doing this. So anyway, I would say, again, goes back to, don't be complacent. Check your work, question what you're doing, step back and make sure it's the right thing as we spend this level of money. But I think there's a lot of hope here. It's finally an encouraging moment after years of banging our heads against the wall. So again, glad to give this update, and thank you very much.